Hello, I'm Kendra the Shakespanderian, and I'm so great at procrastinating that even though I graduated from college, I still have homework that I'm putting off. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is I'm doing a paint a picture thing today. Kind of drew it, but also painted it. So it's a drawing painting thing. Yeah, let's just cut to the time lapse, okay? Alright, you guys. Today I'm going to be doing a portrait inspired by Amy Lee. So last week I did a video, it was a portrait of Brandon Urie, and it was essentially like a noob art tutorial. Like if you have no idea what you're doing, this is just a super simple, easy way to get started. Today I'm not doing it quite the same. So last week in my video, I actually traced out the portrait before I shaded it in and everything. This week, I am doing everything freehand, which means spending forever trying to get the proportions right. This was actually my second attempt trying to get this face right because the first one was just really bad and I threw it away and I couldn't deal with it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about tracing because that's what I did in my last video. So from what I have seen, tracing tends to be a very controversial subject within the art community. Is it really art? Is it just stealing? You know, if you're tracing over something that's not really showing off your own skill set, you're not actually doing it, you're just tracing, you know, just tracing, right? Rather than sit here and bore you guys to death with talking about my portrait and talking about how difficult it is to get proportions right, because oh my god, this was difficult. Let's just focus on the tracing. For one, I feel like it's important to note that tracing does require some amount of artistic capabilities. You can trace something out and then as soon as you go in to shade it, still looks awful because you have no idea what you're doing with your shading. Case in point, I'm pretty sure this is actually the exact same reference image that I used in a previous portrait that I did of Amy Lee that was also traced. And here it is on the screen. This was one of my earliest portraits. And I had no idea, honestly, no idea what I was doing at that point. And I was just like, I'm gonna trace this thing out, I'm gonna make it look awesome, and then I get this. So I think the point of saying that tracing doesn't require any skill isn't that super applicable. I think it's also important to note that as far as proportions on faces are concerned, if you get anything messed up, it's not gonna look quite right. I think it's also really important that we take into account the context with which tracing is occurring. For instance, do we actually blame tattoo artists when they're doing portraits for tracing? Because most of them will trace out at least the major features and then they'll go in with their shading. Proportions are difficult, and if you mess those up on somebody's skin, that's not coming off. Another question I would have to ask, because this is something that I do quite a bit when I do portraits, is using a reference considered cheating? Because throughout this portrait, while I'm trying to get my proportions right, I was sitting there with my pencil kind of measuring stuff out comparatively. Is it cheating to sit there and like measure out the original against what you're drawing? So I know with the Brandon Urie portrait, I didn't really do anything special with it. It was just the portrait, and that's mostly because I wanted to show that art can be accessible, that you can make something as interesting and difficult as a portrait, even if you have no idea what you're doing. But in the case of this portrait in particular, I'm doing quite a bit more. I'm making it a lot more abstract. I'm not really giving her a body or anything, but I am putting her in a more abstract context. So let's say I had traced out her features at the beginning instead of doing it all freehand. Would you consider that to be art, or is it just a picture because I didn't actually sit there and freehand it. We could go into a very long-winded conversation about what really is art from here. Because if we consider it simply human expression, then there's a lot of stuff that we might not even be able to consider as art, even though it's some of the greatest works out there, because it doesn't really express humans. But that's a completely different topic. Sticking with tracing, though, I do think that it's important to be open to it. I think if somebody's just exclusively tracing something out and saying, hey, look, this is what I made, there is a problem with that. However, I feel that for a beginner or for simple references for something as complicated and finicky as a face, I personally don't see that much of a problem with tracing, especially, again, when you are beginning. For me, when I first started doing the whole art thing, tracing was huge. It gave me a chance to deconstruct what my project was. In the case of my own art, sometimes I want to focus more on the details of the project, on how it's shaded and how it's colored, than on the specific, say, proportions of the face. It's a shortcut, but honestly, art isn't a competition. Unless you're specifically in an art competition, art is not in and of itself inherently a competition. It is a creative process. Final reactions, final verdict. Tracing is not bad unless you are just straight up stealing somebody's idea. If you are tracing somebody else's work and then saying just because you traced it out that it is your own work, that's bad. That is what's known as plagiarism, my dear friend, and that is highly frowned upon and kind of illegal. Not just kind of, it is very much just flat out illegal. Don't do it. However, if you are using it as, say, a learning tool or as a shortcut because it's not something that you feel is necessary to your work, so long as you aren't just tracing the entire thing and then claiming it as yourself, as your own work, as your own talent, honestly, there's nothing wrong with tracing. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of what I made down in the comments below. Like this video if you liked it. Hit subscribe. Hit that notification bell even though it doesn't do anything. And share this video with your friends so that they can look at the things that I make and stuff. And I'm gonna go. And I'll see you later. Bye-bye.